said, my name is Rebecca. I'm a clinical specialist and a physiotherapist by background. I was fortunate when I graduated that I specialised straight away into learning disabilities and neurology. So postural management has really been a key objective of mine with my clients throughout my career. So my passion around specialist seating is driven from that. So as I said, we're going to work our way through the theory now with the presentation slides. If there are any issues, then please do use the chat, and Alex is monitoring that and you can let us know if there's any technical issues, but hopefully now you can see the presentation. Okay, so first of all, I just wanted to set the scene. Now, evidence suggests that adults average around 9.5 hours every day of sedentary time. Between the ages of 65 and 74, this increases to 10 or more hours. And by age 75, people are sitting on average for a staggering 11 hours every day. Now, of course, these figures could be even higher for individuals who are wheelchair users or those with limited mobility. And it can often be difficult to reduce these figures due to illness, injury or disease. So that's why it's essential that these individuals have the most appropriate seating system for what could be the most significant part of their day. Now, published research, guidelines and anecdotal evidence demonstrates the need for good postural management and that provision of specialist seating can improve the quality of life for individuals. Especially in itself, I'm not going to run through this list isn't exhaustive, but I just wanted to show you just exactly how specialist seating can fit into postural management and how it can help our clients through comfort, relaxation, energy management, improving their health and well-being through good physiological or optimum physiological function, providing a stable base of support for freedom of movement in the upper limbs, and even down to protecting their body shape or even restoring it in some cases. We can hopefully be facilitating normal movement patterns and activities of daily living, and also improving engagement, interaction and social inclusion. It's become a bit more clear as we work through the case studies a bit later. But just visually, just wanted to show you exactly how specialist seating can help with a before and after photo. So as you can see, this lady, gravity is really taking hold, making her lean, her head is slumping forward, and we could have pressure, increased pressure then going through just one side of the pelvis and increasing that pressure injury risk as well. And what we're aiming to do then with specialist seating is to support her in a more upright midline position with as much contact as possible with the chair for equal weight distribution, opening up the chest and shoulder girdle for improved, and the abdomen of course for improved physiological function, having the pelvis stable at the back of the chair so that she's safe, but also allowing the upper limbs to be free from that load bearing role and free for functional movement. Also then got the head in midline for interaction, safe eating and drinking, trunk and spine supported, the arms supported at the correct height, and the feet. Now the feet, I don't know if you agree, Les, is one thing that can often get overlooked, even though 19% of our body weight goes through our feet in sitting. So hopefully as we go through we can emphasise that in the case studies.
We'll look at that as part of the case studies, and quite often what I do as part of an assessment, part of the initial setup, is to get a carer to sit in one of the chairs with and without the foot plate, and just to see how that feels and how much of a difference that can make. Just to experience, you do actually, for the vast majority of people, feel more comfortable with the kind of reassurance of having support underneath your feet. Yeah,
it gives us that feedback that we need. We naturally seek that support through our feet. So not only does it make us stable, but hopefully reduce the risk of pressure injuries as well, because we've got the weight more evenly distributed. See, this position is the gold standard, and I appreciate that we do work with a range of clients with complex presentations, but in those cases we are still aiming for their optimum sitting position, and of course a regular change as well throughout the 24 hours. That's a whole different webinar to go on to. Okay.
Hours.
Yeah. Okay. So we know that postural management and specialist seating can improve quality of life for individuals, but there's also a need for specialist seating to ensure longevity of high quality services as well, because when it's prescribed appropriately and in a timely manner, specialist seating can actually be significantly cost effective. Now, this will all become clear as we work our way through the session and through the case studies. But it's just remembering that we've got the human cost and the risk of not providing individuals with seating, but also the financial costs as well. Now, once a postural assessment is completed, clinicians will need to justify our specialist seating prescription. The clinical justification is the evidence information that links our recommended prescription to the intended objectives and also the client's aims. And it's an opportunity for us as clinicians to advocate for the best client outcomes. Clinical justification is important because it aids decision-making, prioritising and securing funding as well for equipment. Now, it's critical that we involve the client support network and think about the environment in which the chair will be used, because this is what's key to compliance and consistent use of a care plan. But as I mentioned, we also need to appreciate the importance of responsible funding requests. Cost effectiveness must be considered and clearly demonstrated, because we want to make sure that we continue with high quality services for all for many, many years to come. Typical funding requests, those of you who do this on a daily basis, it doesn't teach grammar to suck eggs, but in terms of funding requests, typical formats that we might see, just as a reminder really, as we work our way through the case studies. But generally they'll be holistic and where possible, using a multidisciplinary approach. They'll identify the need, considering the aims and objectives of the client, the support network and the environment. It'll present the clinical findings from the postural assessment and then prove how the chair, including the functions and accessories, can meet those needs. Funding requests will state the risks and consequences of not prescribing the chair as well, which is something we'll cover today. We need to back up any of those claims, of course, with evidence, research, literature, legislation, guidelines, and so on. We'll demonstrate the cost effectiveness of prescribing the chair and the cost implications of not, outlining past and current interventions as well, because this can demonstrate that less costly interventions have been considered first that have sadly been unsuccessful. Including outcome measures and photographs to make it personable, but also objective measurements as well to clearly demonstrate how specialist seating has improved, especially if you're doing a trial. Putting outcome measures in place can really prove that specialist seating over a 2-week period or a 6-week period has actually had an impact on the client. Okay, so let's review some case studies then and the clinical justifications, which will hopefully help us understand exactly how specialist seating can improve quality of life and be cost effective. And as I said, it's not just about the economics, but also the human costs as well. So first of all, we have George, a 52-year-old gentleman who experienced a stroke. He lives with his wife and was recently discharged from a rehabilitation setting. He's semi-ambulant and still needing assistance of one for transfers. Has dysphagia, so he's got some swallowing problems. He's self-reported that he's most comfortable when lying in bed, which is making him increasingly frustrated because there's an inability there to interact with family, but also the inability to sit out comfortably as well, because he enjoys some hobbies such as puzzles and things. As a result, he has got reduced activity. In terms of his postural challenges, at the top, discomfort, fatigue, poor postural control and sit-in balance, so he's got a hemiparesis, pelvic instability, he's got abnormal muscle tones, he's experiencing some spasticity, foot drop and an increased body weight and size. Now, the risks that we identified with George were postural deterioration, so he was at risk of fixed postures, contractures and scoliosis. He was at risk of gaining more weight due to his reduced activity levels, which would then increase his risk of a second stroke. Poor physiological function. Obviously, we know about his swallowing issues, so there's risks there around unsafe eating and drinking, and an increased risk then of potentially aspirating and developing an infection. Pressure injuries, poor well-being, so this frustration and social isolation could in turn lead to low mood. And then, of course, impacted rehabilitation potential, because the aim was for George to improve with his activity, with his posture, with his engagement in activities and so on. Now, the injury to the brain caused by stroke, as we know, can lead to widespread and long-lasting problems. Although some people may recover quickly and return to normal function, many people who have a stroke need long-term support to help them regain as much independence as possible. And the process of recovery and rehab really depend on the effects and their severity. Good postural management throughout the full 24 hours can enhance an individual's recovery and rehab following a stroke. Specialist seating can support them with their postural management programme by offering a solution for balancing these three key considerations within stroke rehab. So we've got comfort, which in turn will affect compliance and consistency. Energy conservation. So hopefully George will have better engagement in rehab, better engagement in activities of daily living, and better interaction with his family and with his environment. And then thirdly, postural support. So correct and adequate postural control and stability. It's vital that a person who has experienced a stroke is encouraged to sit out and facilitated to sit out as soon as they are able to. Sitting out is essential to build up tolerance of a seated posture. It can provide maximum stimulation and then hopefully give a sense of normality as well. The aim of positioning an individual recovering from stroke is to promote their optimal rehab, increasing their postural awareness, modulating their muscle tone, providing appropriate sensory information and increasing stimulation, especially through that affected side, and then hopefully preventing secondary complications such as pressure injuries, pain, postural deterioration and poor physiological function. So with George's clinical justification, before we go on to the practical side, we decided on the Hydroflex, and the flexibility of the Hydroflex was key, as George did have good rehab potential as long as he had adequate postural management in place. The chair was provided on the plan that he would be gradually able to remove some of that support to encourage active engagement in sitting to achieve his rehab outcomes. The Hydroflex can be, as we run through the accessories and things, they can be adjusted and added retrospectively as the user's needs change. Okay, so this close.
So we'll have a little look at the Hydroflex, and we'll
get the video back up.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. And we'll just review the assessment process that I undertook to identify and provide the quote and following on the setup for the Hydroflex. If I just quickly, very, very quickly give you a quick little overview of chairs I also considered. If you need a bit more information or a lot more information, if you refer to the website, it'll give you a full rundown on the accessories and feature sets and client groups for each chair. I did think of the Smart Seat Pro, a little bit too complex for George, really. Especially because we wanted to encourage that rehab potential as well. We didn't want to give too much support that he wouldn't actively engage in that sitting. And as part of my assessment remit, I like to try and keep things as simple as possible as well. And the Smart Seat Pro was just that little bit complex. It was just a little bit too much. The other chair I considered, and I had the three chairs with me on the day, would have been the Hydro Tilt, tilt in space only, which is a strength rather than a weakness, but just not quite supportive enough for George. So that led me to look at our Hydroflex chair. Key to me, one of the key things that jumps out to me when I read the notes before I visited George was that he was still semi-ambulant. He still had the ability to transfer, and quite often the most complex and difficult assessment that we have is where we have a client who still has the ability to stand, to walk, but really needs something slightly more postural. So in one sense, it kind of led me to think about our rise and recline chairs for George, but they didn't give enough postural support. So again, brings me back to the Hydroflex. So what we have with Hydroflex is a tilt in space chair. there's 30 degrees of tilt. But one of the keys, obviously, energy management with tilt in space helped George maintain a good posture. Secondly, the range of our tilt in space on this chair means that it tilts ever so slightly forward. So for that stand transfer.
And remember that with George, one of the main risks was him gaining weight and increasing his risk of a second stroke. So we really wanted to encourage his mobility and his activity and make it as easy and safe as possible, especially for his wife as well. She was the main carer. And
that safety feature being we get feet flat on the floor and it's a controlled transfer from the chair. The other thing to consider, I'll mention it before I forget, the chair is either a manual or a powered option. We opted for power for George because, you know, with some of the transfers at home, his wife was helping, but it just helped to have the independent control of the chair to help with the transfer process.
And also with the energy management as well, if you needed to do the tilt.
Yeah, and George had the cognitive ability to kind of use the movement functions on a chair. So in one sense, I guess if you look at the funding, the addition of a powered option to the chair makes the chair more costly. But then again, the outcomes far outweigh the initial cost of supplying the chair.
Yeah, and as well, the wife couldn't be at home all the time. She obviously needed to continue with her occupation as well. So I mean, we'll cover that in the next case study as well, but just be mindful about care packages and just thinking about that cost saving as well. So
again, coming back to key features on the HydroFlex.
What we'll do, I think, is if we go through it as comfort, we said about comfort, energy management and postural control. You mentioned if we focus on the tilt in space, we mentioned that we might as well cover, because that not only helps comfort, but also energy management as well. Tilt in space is a fantastic feature, but it's something that does need to be prescribed carefully because it's not suitable or safe for everyone. One of the things we had to be mindful of with George was obviously his dysphagia, his swallowing problem. So we did need to get advice. We did need to advise the therapy team to get advice from speech and language around that. But he did tolerate a slight tilt with it. He was able to manage his saliva and tolerate a slight tilt.
So should we just talk about the comfort?
Yeah.
And sometimes,
and the postural stuff that George.
And sometimes accommodating comfort is a little bit of a compromise between perhaps the most more precise kind of lateral support. So we could have looked at adjustable laterals, but we opted for a contoured back. If you can see on the chair there, it's a deep sculpted shape which would prompt and guide George back into the chair.
I mean, comfort is a top priority with us at CareFlex. And we obviously want to promote that good postural management, but comfort is always the top priority, because ultimately, if the user isn't comfortable within the chair, they simply just not going to use
the chair. Yeah. And that's numerous visits to go and try and work out why they're not using the chair. And ultimately, as you said, it's because they're not comfortable.
We can actually do a quick activity with everyone, actually.
Yeah.
Well,
do you really want to do this?
Yeah. We like to do these activities just so everyone can really put themselves in our clients' shoes, to really just emphasise the point of why comfort is a top priority for us. Please be mindful, I don't want to cause anyone to fall out of their chair or cause anyone any pain, so please don't feel like you have to do this. I am going to make Les do it though.
Oh, you are? I was just looking for the okay. Can I do it in HydroFlex?
Yeah. So if you imagine you have quite a complex postural presentation, so maybe there's a wind sweeping, so you've got the knees rolling over to one side, you've got a pelvic obliquity, so the pelvis is higher on one side, and a scoliosis with that lean and a kyphotic posture. And then I'm going to make you stay like that for the entire webinar.
It's not going to happen, is it? I
mean, come out of that position. I mean, do you think you could sit like that for 1 hour, 2 hours, 8 hours? Some people are making sitting in their chairs for 10 hours a day. So it's really, really key that a user is comfortable. I can't emphasize that enough, to make sure that they are happy and compliant with a piece of equipment, because then they'll just negate all that hard work that we've done.
Yeah.
So
to come back to the chair, with the dysphagia and head support, we did look at typical, very popular headrest with the HydroFlex. It's the soft profile headrest. We can adjust and shape that. And it works in one of a couple of ways, either just sitting down behind the shoulder or a little bit more supportive in this position here, I sink back into it and it just holds my head, it envelops the head and again prompts that midline. But what we actually found worked a little bit better for George was a headrest called the inline headrest. Now we've arranged a headrest, so you can check the website. And what this did for George, it's quite a strange looking headrest, but when it's in place, I don't really know that it's there. It just, again, guides my head. I've got good peripheral vision. It's not causing heat or pressure issues for my ears leaning against it. And George just found that really, really comfortable.
Yeah.
Again, comfort coming across with posture worked really, really well.
Yeah. Well, the stuff that actually another thing that helped. Sorry, Les. Another thing that helped with George was the channel leg rest. So not only did it obviously keep everything in midline posturally, trying to keep the lower limb supported in midline, but comfort-wise, he just found it a lot more comfortable and secure and stable to have the channel leg rest and have the lower limbs supported.
Yeah, I mean, he was kind of drifting off towards the side of the foot plate, but the channels worked really, really well.
Yeah, and I guess the key thing to remember with comfort is that it is entirely subjective. So we've got to rely on the clients or the support worker know the clients well to see whether they are comfortable in the chair, because as I said, that really is the top priority. Okay, so energy management, we spoke about fatigue. Another thing that helped with energy management was George was that pelvic stability, because it helped him to just feel stable and secure within the chair, that he was able to relax. So the body segments were working efficiently together. And one thing that he did need for that pelvic stability
was, this is actually a 2-point pelvic strap, but we actually went for a 4-point pelvic strap. Again, the 4-point just holding the strap down and helping to lock that pelvis back in place. And quite deceptively, it looks quite invasive to wear a strap, but again, he found this quite comfortable.
Yeah, I guess people do get sometimes a bit worried about prescribing things like belts and harnesses, which we should, because we have to be responsible and careful. There is a medical device alert in place for it, so there does need to be risk assessed. I mean, George was able, he had capacity to consent, and he was happy to use it because he felt the difference that it had. But obviously, we might need to have best interest decision and so forth, depending on where you are in the country. But yeah, it's just be mindful of whether it's something safe and done snugly as well. Yeah,
I mean, it's really important to monitor the use of a pelvic strap. Quite often, I go to review products with therapists, and you check the pelvic strap, and you can get a hand in. It's not really doing what it's meant to do.
Plus, it's unsafe as well. Yeah.
And again, if you're looking at the cost effectiveness of equipment, that regular review is really important to make sure that the chair's performing. Yeah,
definitely. One of the main things with energy management, because as we go through, what you'll find is everything we're talking about is all interlinked. So with energy management, as soon as George felt stable within the chair, he could relax, his body segments were working efficiently together, so he had more energy to engage in activities of daily living. So George, as we know, wanted to interact with family. He didn't want to be confined to his bed in his bedroom. He wanted to be able to sit out, and he also wanted to engage in activities and hobbies as well. So another thing we looked at was the tray.
So the tray was quite helpful just for activities, but also it helped a little bit with posture, because it tended to open up the shoulder girth. It just worked really, really well.
Especially with the weakness they had on one side of the body as well. That we did say that obviously V cushions and stuff are sometimes quite helpful to go on top of the trays, just to give that extra padded on the upper limbs. And that anterior support as well, as Les said, opens up the shoulder girdle, which in turn helps with physiological function as well, and his breathing, his digestion, and so on. Okay, so postural support then, we've spoken about the contoured back, getting George into a midline position for a whole host of reasons. Another thing that we did find, because gravity was taking effect because of the weakness, that he was maybe going into a posterior pelvic tilt, we were able to get our pelvic stability with a slight tilt and the pelvic belt. But he did still have a little bit of a kyphosis. We were able to use the articulating headrest.
The top section to kind of match that kyphotic posture and to provide more support and to get the headrest into a more effective position. That can just be locked off.
it was really key for George to have this postural support. Obviously, within stroke rehab, clients are at risk of postural deterioration, so he was at risk of developing, because of his one-sided weakness, he was leaning. So if he didn't put him into midline, he was at risk of a scoliosis, he was at risk of that kyphosis becoming worse and contractures. So we really needed to get that postural support right to maintain him in a good position, but also then the added tilt in space to get a change of pressure and weight distribution. So that was critical. Pelvic stability, we go on about that, but that was critical for George as well. But for anyone, we always start at the pelvis, because it dictates what happens above and below in this foundation for sitting. And
with all the chairs, they're quite major on pelvic stability, because we've got the adjustable seat width, seat depth, and the foot support. So that was key for us. And
that pelvic stability then freed up the movement in his upper limbs. So what we found originally, that he was kind of tucking his elbows to stabilize himself into the corners of the chair. So when we got that pelvic stability, he was able to then free up the movement, which was obviously key in getting his affected side engaged and working. And
it was the other key, part of the setup process was a little bit of training for carers, and George's wife was to encourage him to use the arms of the chair, because he was so used to sitting in this kind of posture. He was kind of habitual. So just to encourage him to bring those arms out and to relax into the chair.
I've actually got another good activity now that you mentioned that. So as I said, we'd like to do these activities. It helps to get the blood flowing for us as well. Again, this one's even more risky, so be careful. Be with this one. Please don't fall off the chairs, and please don't try if you don't feel confident. But it's just about reinforcing how postural stability can free up those limbs for functional movement. So if you imagine that you drop something on the floor and you were reaching forward to pick it up off the floor, it's quite a simple movement for us to be able to do, reaching outside of our base of support but remaining stable within the chair. Now imagine you didn't have pelvic stability, and maybe you had a bit of a posterior pelvic tilt. Also didn't have foot support. We mentioned that earlier about the importance of foot support, but we haven't got foot support, and then we're trying to pick something up off the chair. I mean, I'm not even going to try. My balance isn't great as it is, but I'm not even going to try and pick something off there. And I don't have any damage to my body systems. I've got good postural control and good sitting balance, but even that task for me to reach out my base of support without that stability is very risky. So if we aren't enabling George to be able to do that, his rehab potential is just going to sadly decline rather than go the other way. So it's really key, that pelvic stability and postural control. Okay. Another thing, talking about postural control, was his foot drop. So the foot plate.
Again, we needed to be mindful of working with and preventing further foot drop. So the leg rest of the foot plate is articulating, so it matches the movement of the leg and supports the foot. But we can actually angle adjust the foot plate as well, so it starts at 90, and there are increments to take that out. And that was quite important for him, because the last thing you want is to sit for long periods of time with legs elevated, ankles swelling, and slowly but surely you lose the ability to maintain that independent transfer.
Especially if that and the contracture developed in that. How would he then be able to get a good foot placement on the ground to enable that activity? So you can see everything within the chair, everything was described is all interlinked in ensuring George best rehab potential. I think that was it on the chair. So I just wanted to take you back now to a presentation.
Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, please. And what we're going to do is have a look at maybe just some of the cost effectiveness. So I hope that I know it's a lot to take in. We've only got 45 minutes an hour with you guys, so it's a lot to take in. But I just wanted to run through that practical so you can have an idea of actually how seating can help with our clients' quality of life. And now I just wanted to run through some interesting facts and figures and guidelines and so on of actually how specialist seating can be cost effective too when it's prescribed in a timely manner and when it's appropriate. So first, obviously, mentioned about postural control for George and reducing that risk of postural deterioration. because George was at risk of developing fixed postures, fixed deformities and contractures and so on, because of his high tone, because of the abnormal postures. But contractures are costly to the individual and to society. So not even thinking about actually the devastating effects that contractures can have on individuals with pain that comes with the spasms potentially, the reduction in being able to engage in functional movement under the restriction of it. But actually, in terms of the cost, it's estimated that inpatient treatment and surgery for a single contracture costs about £18,000. So if George did develop contractures and he needed surgery to help release some of that, then actually it can cost around £18,000. Conservative approaches are recommended to prevent and manage contractures, and when used for corrective purposes, so in terms of rehab settings for George, a specialist seating system can be viewed as an orthotic device as well. So in terms of our clinical justifications, it would be a really key part of George's rehab programme to offer that postural management and positioning, which is so key. Okay, so the next thing we mentioned that George was at risk of was increase in weight, so reduced activity. If we didn't facilitate that standing, didn't facilitate engagement in physical activity, then he was at risk of weight gain and potentially a second stroke. So obesity can not only affect an individual's ability to achieve an optimum seated position, because obviously it affects their body size and the proportions, and it does then become limited with seating. I know we're not covering it today, but in terms of things like the Hydrotilt XL and thinking about bariatric, we can get that information, on the website. And there's growth in every chair to accommodate, increases in seat width. Yeah, but obesity not only can affect posture in that way, but can also increase the risk of stroke and other serious health complications. Physical inactivity and obesity is believed to cost the NHS up to £1 billion for physical inactivity and over £5 billion for obesity, which is astonishing. In terms of stroke, now if George was to experience another stroke, then it's probably astonishing to know that the mean cost of new onset stroke is around £45,000 in the first year alone. And then after the stroke, then in subsequent years, you're talking around £25,000 for that stroke care. Now, since most of that cost is attributed to unpaid care interventions that are aimed at rehab, and we've said that word a lot, but that's essentially what the Hydroflex chair is a rehab chair, because of the adjustability and the flexibility to change with the needs of the user. But reducing new and recurrent strokes are likely to yield a substantial benefit to carers, to the client, but also the cost savings to society as well. And these are I really just wanted to put some of this information in because it can really help with our clinical justifications. It's not just us choosing a comfy chair on a whim. We're actually thinking about the client, but also the service as well, and being responsible with our funding requests. Specialist seating can enable improved rehab outcomes because it promotes that independence with transfers of mobility, increases activity levels, and in turn, hopefully reducing the risk of George becoming obese and experiencing a second stroke. The next risk factor that we mentioned was obviously his swallowing ability, his dysphagia. Now, a fifth of people with ischemic stroke are likely to suffer from dysphagia, and then a fifth of those are likely to develop pneumonia, which is quite an astonishing figure. Recent evidence suggests that stroke-associated pneumonia is a main cause of post-stroke mortality, and it can actually be prevented by early dysphagia assessment. So this is where it's key. We always talk about multidisciplinary approaches, but to signpost to other services for that expertise if we need to get referrals to other specialties. Now, it's estimated that 4,500 people could develop pneumonia each year in the UK, which then carries a potential avoidable additional treatment cost. This is on top of maybe the cost of stroke that we mentioned, of approximately 2.5 million, as well as of course, the preventive risk of mortality. Now, in summary for George then, I hope we've made it clear that failure to provide appropriate equipment can not only delay stroke recovery, but it can lead to unnecessary and costly extended hospital stays and a final level of independence. Stroke care requires an appropriate environment that includes easy access to aid for rehab, including chairs of correct height and providing appropriate postural support and pressure redistribution. And that was released by the Department of Health, so it's quite a handy tool there to use. A significant body of evidence relates to various types of physical rehab, and it shows the effectiveness of recovery of function and mobility after stroke. So that's why we really emphasise that, maintaining that independence for George. And if we focus on activities of daily living and the well-being aspect as well, it tends to have improved outcomes. So that's anything you wanted to add about George, Les?
No, I mean, you know, latest from George is that he's using the chair and it's proved quite effective. The
key was that comfort was getting him to actually use the chair. Yeah. It can be a shock, the medical piece of equipment, something that may be a new diagnosis of something where you've not needed something like that before.
Yeah.
To be compliant.
Family and carers get on well with the chair. It's relatively, you know, once set up, there are a few adjustments that need to be made. That need to be made. Mm-hmm. They just needed to concentrate on a successful and good transfer into the chair. And then just use the tilting space to help with, or George will actually adjust himself with the tilting space.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, what we'll do now then is move on to Freda. So 84 years old, Alzheimer's disease, frailty. Freda lives in a care home. She was experiencing recurrent pressure injuries and respiratory infections and was becoming increasingly agitated when sat out. She wasn't able to sit for longer because she was immobile now and now hoisted for all transfers. And what we found was that she was sitting, I think it was just a high back armchair at the home, which was obviously shared with other residents. So the seat depth was wrong, the seat height was wrong.
It was a classic case study if we were looking for one.
Yeah, a lack of postural support and pressure care, and there was no opportunity for a rest as well. So she was at risk of sliding down the chair and going into that sacral sitting. So in terms of postural challenges, discomfort, postural instability and a change in postural awareness, which is quite typical in dementia. She was fatiguing quickly against the effects of gravity, which was worsening her posterior tilt and her kyphotic posture. Experiencing generalised weakness with leaning to the side and sliding down the chair. As I said, posterior pelvic tilt and associated kyphosis. She was unable to change her position independently, both physically and cognitively. She had lost that ability. And of course, she had impaired physiological function with those recurrent infections. So her risks were falls, of course, sliding from the chair and out of the chair, poor health and developing a serious infection that could then lead to hospital admission, worsening pressure injuries, and behaviours that challenge risk of self and others because of this increase in agitation that the care home were noticing. And we believe that was down to the discomfort and
she just wasn't a happy person.
No, Okay, so Alzheimer's disease, I mean, as you probably know, in the later stages, and especially in vascular dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies, an individual's cognitive and physical decline can result in the lack of ability to move effectively, safely and independently, which is what we saw in Freda. Guidelines recommend that care home providers address the specific needs of older people by ensuring that the environment encourages social interaction and activity and ensures that they are physically comfortable. So again, it just reinforces what we do here at Care Lives. We're really prioritising that comfort. The older person can experience general weakness and fatigue, as we know, with or without an associated illness or disability. But frailty, which is characterised by a progressive decline in physical, mental and social functions, can significantly exacerbate those problems. And then what we saw in Freda was this result in pelvic instability and poor posture control as gravity was taking hold and gravity was pulling her into a slumped posture with this lean and sliding down the chair. Now, as we know, a regular change in body position is essential for comfort, energy management and the prevention of postural deterioration, which was really key for George. But within dementia and frailty care, the key objectives that we were working on were promoting her physiological function to ensure good health and well-being, safety, but also social interaction and engagement. And it's worth reminding that individuals with dementia may need prompting or full support to be able to achieve this repositioning. So our clinical justification with Freda was that we opted for the hydrotilt chair, It's a robust and comfortable yet simple to use chair, which was perfect for the care home.
We'll run through the rationale in a minute.
And we felt that it would offer long-term support as Freda's condition progressed. So let's get the chair up. The video back on. There we go.
Here we go. So again, just quickly, Freda's situation is a classic situation where if we're not careful, we over-specify the product. So again, just quickly, SmartSeat Pro, too complicated. Especially, I like to take into consideration the environment the chair is going to be used. So the care home environment can be, let's say, quite challenging for people understanding and operation of the specialist seating.
High turnover of staff. That might be needed and things,
So the Pro wasn't really needed. A lot of features on that wouldn't be used and perhaps not used correctly. Flex, possibly, but Freda could tolerate sitting at 90 degrees.
We did.
She had a full range of movement. So we didn't really need back angle recline.
But we didn't really talk about back angle recline last time. The Hydroflex is not something that George particularly wanted to use. He didn't quite enjoy being reclined. But in terms of comfort, it is a really good tool, and it's perfect as well for individuals who maybe cannot achieve, like I said, that 90 degrees. So we need to open up the hip angle to enable them to get their pelvis in the back of the chair. But back angle recline is one of the ones, especially care folks, we're really conscious can be prescribed inappropriately and can actually cause a lot more damage than it can good. It's got to be used very carefully with a select amount of people, and because if we're using back angle recline with that and we haven't achieved pelvic stability, then they're just going to slide out of the chair and all the hard work and posture management is totally lost.
So not the Hydroflex.
No.
So that brought us to be honest, my favourite chair within the Careflex range, the Hydro Tilt. It's almost as old as me. It's a tilt in space chair. Again, 30 degrees of tilt. We didn't need that negative, I call it a negative tilt, that tilt forward, because it was a fully hoisted situation for Freda. Again, we could adjust the seat width and the seat depth, helping to promote pelvic stability.
The main goal with Freda was her health, wasn't it? Her physiological function. It was her trunk symmetry, getting a midline position to and a good head position, so that we were reducing the risk of those infections that she was experiencing. That was the main goal with Freda.
So once we had the depth and the width set up, we looked at lateral support and perhaps accommodating this kyphos posture that she had. So
we considered a waterfall.
Waterfall was the first thing that we tried. I'm sure you all know what a waterfall back is, but again, if you need a bit more detail, have a look at the website. You'll see the accessories. You'll see the waterfall back listed for the Hydro Tilt. But it was really, really comfortable. But there was a couple of issues with it. Firstly, it was not giving quite enough postural support. We couldn't quite keep Freda in that midline position. Whatever we did,
gravity was still
gravity took it out. The other thing with the waterfall back, and because it moved, it was a little bit of a source of agitation for Freda. It was just moving all the time, and she was flicking the top section away, so it just didn't work.
No.
So that took me to the option of a contoured back. Once if I lift that out of the chair, you can see what that is. So that just gives us that contoured shape. And what it was doing for Freda, it was prompting her to sit in that midline position. It was guiding her back into the chair. We also just repositioned some of the foam in the back there just to give a little bit more support on her right. So that just makes that section there just a little bit more prominent. And to accommodate the kyphos, we just used the soft profile headrest, which we adapted slightly. It's one of our tailored solutions, just to give us that depth that we needed to absorb the kyphos.
It was getting that midline position, getting the head supported, just to be able to get safe eating and drinking as well. So,
and of course, foot support. Didn't have a full range of movement at the knee, so leg elevation wasn't ideal, but what we did have is some negative angles on the leg rest as well. So all in all, it worked quite well for Freda.
Yeah.
Especially
with hoisting as well, getting that like tilt.
Yeah.
It just me, because I mean we always say that the position in the chair is only as good as the initial positioning, isn't it? So that transfer into the chair is a really key part.
Yeah. And the simplicity of the chair meant that carers could really focus and concentrate on that transfer into the chair. They didn't have to worry about back angle recline. They didn't have to worry about laterals or cushions. They just needed to concentrate on getting Freda in that good midline position in the chair. And that's using a little bit of tilt.
Yeah, the gravity will just bring the pelvis then into the back of the chair.
We did consider motorizing the chair, but I mean, Freda didn't have the cognitive awareness or ability to control that. It was a carer operated feature. So the carers were quite happy to use a manual chair.
Yeah. So in terms of health then, achieving that midline position, good head position for eating and drinking, and trying to reduce the risk of the repeated chest infections. Another key thing for Freda was pressure management, because she was unable to change her position. She was relying on staff to use tilted space or to actually use different bits of equipment throughout the day to get a change in position. But actually for the times that she was sat in the chair, we needed to obviously get equal weight distribution, which we achieved through postural management. But then we were using water cell technology and things to...
All the seating, I've got to be careful not to slip into sales mode here, but all the seating comes with pressure care as standard, and that's medium to high. If you check on the website again, you'll see we've a link to
published research.
Some published research by Salford University. That was on the Journal of Tissue Viability as well, I think. Yeah.
So again, if you need that evidence for water cell technology, then you can use that as part of your clinical justifications.
I think, are we going to mention the aesthetic as well?
Yeah, because that was a really key thing, especially within dementia care, or if you work in learning disabilities or with individuals with autism, the aesthetics and sometimes be a difficult thing to ask for, because generally people obviously want to provide seating in blacks or browns so they can be reused. But in situations like this, the aesthetics was actually really key.
Yeah. I mean, I've had customers, clients, service users who declined to use a chair on delivery, and we just can't understand why. And it's come back to the aesthetic choice. Just so happens that the chair that we assessed with was a certain colour, without us knowing there was an affinity for that colour. And it was a little bit the same with Freda. She specifically wanted like a bright coloured chair, a rosy coloured chair, which was a little bit of thinking back to kind of happier days. So within the range, there's quite a few colour options. I don't know if you can see that very well, but we went for a bright, lively mauve etch 664 for Freda, and that was just
very colourful lady.
That little thing that switched Freda.
And it's just about the compliance. It comes back to then actually making sure that piece of equipment that we put in place is going to be used consistently so that we can achieve the outcomes. Because if it's just sat in the corner, then we lose everything that we've been working on. Just quickly, I know, conscious of the time, another key thing, especially within maybe dementia or in elderly services, when people are maybe confined to the chairs for longer, is looking at things like the environment and where we position the chair. Things like making sure if somebody's hobby is watching TV, that they are looking at straight at the TV rather than having to rotate and extend to be able to, because then we're obviously creating more postural challenges.
I could just see with a quick question there. Is there a cost difference for colours? And it's the same cost as long as it's from the range for all the fabrics. We do have the ability to, I don't know if the nursing quite a specific fabric of choice that they want. We could accommodate that. There would be a small on cost for that though.
It's just the clinical justification that can sometimes be difficult, but if we're justifying it with evidence, with evidence, NICE guidelines, for example, that we need to, or Department of Health guidelines that we need to address people's well-being and interaction, and that's sometimes a key part of the consistent use. Okay, so if we come back then to finish on, unless there's anything to add on the hydrotilt.
I'll just load that up here, stay with us.
So what I just wanted to do quickly is to just run through just some of the cost effectiveness for Freda's case that helped us, because we often help clinicians with their clinical justifications. So some of the things that we did help them with, thinking about hospital admission. So Freda was at risk of getting it because she was having repeated infections, of maybe getting a serious infection, and ended up then being admitted to hospital for that. An average cost of a day case is Department of Health uses guidelines, and the unit cost is per finished consultant episode, so the time a patient spends in the care of one consultant essentially. The average cost of a day case £742. Average cost of an elective inpatient stay up to £4,000, and non-elective inpatient stay. So if she did become unwell and needed to be admitted to hospital for further medical treatment, then she could be looking at day of a cost of £1,600. So she's having this repeated admissions. We're already covering the cost of that chair, and hopefully then thinking about Freda reducing the risk of that serious infection and the risk of, unfortunately, of death. Okay. Pressure ulcers, and now these figures are the ones that I find the most staggering. Now posture and pressure are inextricably linked. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other, and we need to make sure whatever we do, we are addressing the pressure care needs of individuals. Now, despite all the campaigning that's gone on, the prevalence rate of pressure ulcers has still been steadily increasing since 2017. There have been some studies that have been done in England which showed the prevalence to be anywhere between 4 to 28%. In Wales, back in 2017, they also done a hospital setting study, hospitals in Wales, and then that was estimated at around 9%. So very similar to what the average was in England. It's really difficult in care homes and even more difficult in domestic settings to know exactly what the rates are, but it's thought that it's between 12 and 20% of care home residents could be affected by pressure ulcers. Now, if you think about these figures and then actually the cost that could be involved, you're talking grade 1 ulcer, so the skin is still intact, maybe some areas of redness. You're talking around £1,000 for that treatment. If somebody is then getting grade 4 ulcers with full tissue thickness loss right down to the bone, it could be up to £14,000 for that treatment. So thinking about Freda and her recurrent pressure injuries and the need to the costs associated with that, we can then justify that specialist seating not only helps Freda, but also in cost saving as well. Just some more figures here. And then finally, falls, because one of our main goals with Freda was her safety within the chair, and then just justified as well from a falls prevention point of view, at risk of hip fractures, for example, if she did fall from the chair. But they alone account for 1.8 million hospital bed days, which is around 1.1 billion in hospital costs every year, and that excludes the high cost of social care if somebody then needs an increased care package afterwards, which is crazy. So in summary then, Freda's health and well-being was dependent on her ability to sit out comfortably, and the outcomes were measured then by the report on the review then, I think you went on quite a few times there afterwards, a reduction in those respiratory infections and better management of her pressure areas. Yeah,
it touched base, and the other thing to bear in mind is it will take a little bit of time to build up a tolerance for sitting again. Yeah. So that we kind of monitored that period of time, making sure that the chair, as specified, was actually providing the input that Freda needed. Yeah. There's a lot more that we could talk about. I'm conscious now when we run out of time. We are going to share these presentations with everyone. Yeah. I'm just going to skip forward to the summary. There are some more costs in here, such about the support networks. We said how important they are in carrying out care plans and the cost effectiveness of care packages if we don't support them to do that appropriately. But we'll send these out. And with a bit more detail as well, we'll send the presentations out if anyone wants copies of those. But essentially, we just want to finish on this quote here that was from the Postural Care Action Group. The reducing costs is a long-term benefit of appropriate postural management. It reduces the costs associated with the hospital admission, as we've seen, the costs associated with pressure damage and infection, and reduces the need for invasive and expensive interventions, including surgical procedures. And that's where, as clinicians, we need to get that information into those funding requests. Yeah.
that's all my information. I could go on and on, but
Yeah. So shall I just
Yeah.
close that?
we'll close this down. We'll come back on the screen, and if there's any further questions.
Switch the video back on.
Yeah.
I know that Alex has been monitoring the chat screen. Have you got any questions there, Alex, that we can?
No, we haven't. There's only the one question which, of course, you've already answered, which was referring to the colours. So.
Well, I mean, if there is anything, if you've got contact details for myself and Rebecca, or contact the office, send us an email, give us a telephone call. We'll more than happily respond to any query that you have.
If it's client specific as well, then get in touch.
Yeah. So just to finish off, I'd like to thank you all for attending this morning. It's I'd like to say the sun is shining in South Wales, but it's not. It's there's quite dark clouds.
Yeah.
And just to July's webinar is a special event for us. It's on the 8th of July. We're going to be launching our new chair, the multi-adjust. So we will send you informations and invites, but we really would like to see you again in July.
We can run through some exciting case studies and.
Yeah. It's a question.
Oh, we've got a question.
Bariatric option. The hydro tilt. The extra large hydro tilt has a weight limit of 35 stone and a seat width of 26 inches or 650 millimeters, 65 centimeters. Anybody with anything else for us? Okay. Oh.
No.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming this morning.
Much.
Enjoy the rest of your day. The weekend's almost here. And catch up with you all hopefully in July, July the 8th. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.